tell what an exciting life I live when you look at the projects I do. Fibonacci was a gentleman who wasn't called Fibonacci. His actual name was Leonardo Bonassi. And a historian didn't like that, so they renamed him Fibonacci. Apparently in Italy, back in his time, which was sometime between 1170 and 1250, they were rather loose with the names. And they changed them in accordance with how many children you had, how many wives passed by, and so on and so forth. So he ended up being called Fibonacci, and it was Fibonacci's numeric sequence. He was an absolutely brilliant mathematician. Unfortunately for him, he was followed after his life by people like Descartes and Newton, so nobody remembers him at all, except the people that remember the Fibonacci series. And the Fibonacci series is a series of numbers. And that's where math gets to be a little more pleasant. At the bottom I showed a bit of it. I hope I'm doing this right. There you go. He was from the Republic of Pisa, and that's apparently how they identified you back in those days. He had a wife, he had children. None of the children went on to be mathematicians. Probably a good choice. And the Italian historian that renamed him was, and I cannot pronounce it, Guglielmo E. Libri. Did I say that? Am I close to that, folks? We have an Italian in the room. What he became famous for was what's called the Fibonacci sequence. This was actually a sequence that was discovered in pieces over a period of years. And as a matter of fact, when he first wrote it up, he left the first number off, 0. And what the series of numbers is each number that you see, and I don't know whether this has an arrow pointer. Help. Ah. There we go. What you see is that this number is a sum of the two preceding numbers. And therefore, you get 0 and 1 makes 1, 1 and 1 makes 2, 2 and 1 makes 3, 3 and 2 makes 5, and so on up the line. And it goes on to a tremendous number of numbers. And oddly enough, this sequence has applications in everything you do in your daily life. One of the fascinating ones is it's used by the retail people to calculate what your discount is going to be on your products in big department stores. It's also used to calculate the prices you get when they have a sale. And it tells them what would survive. But more importantly, if you have Fidelity or somebody else like that managing your lifetime funds, they use this formula to decide which company is going in the tank. And it does it because it's used to forecast futures. And this is just my breakdown of what it is. 2 is found. Now the interesting thing is in the original documents he left the 0 off. So what they did was they couldn't figure out where the first number came from. And what it was 0 plus 1 equals 1. So that was the third number. And then 1 plus 1 became 2 and so on up the food chain. And the numbers get to be rather spectacular over a period of time. How's that for growing in a hurry? And these numbers are commonly used by the stock people to determine which way that company is going. And they attach physical events and papers to each of the numbers as they work their way up. And by doing that, they're able to forecast whether the company sinks or swims. Now, in today's world in the stock market, anybody that follows this, you might as well just flip a coin. You're just as well off. But they do try, and it does work. And the interesting thing is, he developed this in a time in which nobody understood number series. And he was absolutely brilliant. He had enough of an education to be able to read and write Latin. And I don't know that was whether he worked I think he worked in the church as well, so that may be where he got it. It wasn't a very formal education. He was far enough up the food chain to get an education. Many of the peasants, they called paisani, am I saying that correctly? Was a common term put in the name which actually meant that you're a peasant. That was a way of flagging it so that nobody gave you too many favors. A ticket to the theater or whatever it was. The methods they use for this number are rather staggering. What I showed here was they actually take the numbers one at a time and do squares with those numbers, meaning what you're looking at here is 21 by 21, here we go, 21 by 21, 5 by 5, 3 by 3. These are all numbers that came in order. 2 and 3 made 5, 3 and 5 made 8, 8 and 5 made 13, 13 and 8 made 21. So that's the first part of the sequence. The interesting thing is that you would think this is just a random number, but the numbers work very well in forecasting everything from war to famine to companies that aren't going to make it. Most of the companies I invest in. It does a spiral too, and this spiral is actually tied to the way they forecast whether you're going up or down. I found it fascinating. I did not realize that they actually used the Fibonacci number series to forecast what sales prices should be at large department stores, like Kohl's or Dillard's or whoever the big ones are. Shows you how much shopping this child does. The ratio was designed as a sequence and a shortcut to modeling growth and decay. And the interesting thing is that the same series of numbers is used to forecast growth and to forecast decay. Decay means declining whatever you're in. You guys see it and use it every time you go to a Kohl's and they have a sudden sale on, or they tell you that they're suddenly 20% off. In the background is somebody's analytics that do this, and it uses the Fibonacci numbers to forecast what they can get away with. Get away with is probably not a bad, it's probably the wrong term to use with retail people, but one of the things that comes out of it, if you look at the numbers, is what's called the golden ratio. And this is a great deal of fun. The golden ratio is a ratio that they came up with, and in the Fibonacci, if you take each of the two numbers and you divide the largest number by the smallest number, the preceding number, you end up with about 1.6, which in this case is 1.618. And it's a number called the phi number. This number is used for everything and is really fascinating. One of the things they've discovered, the psychologists discovered, is that faces, people who have a face in which the eyes and the rest meet this formula, the ratio of here to here and the eye and across the eyes, are much more appealing in advertising. How's that for scary? So if you look at the models that you see big time on TV and the rest, they almost all of them meet that ratio for the eyes versus the rise of the face. Don't know how that works, but they tell me that it's been dry tested against literally tens of thousands of people, and it works every time. And the result is if you meet that and you're semi-attractive, you can make a nice income every year being a model, I guess. I get a big kick out of the golden ratio. Here I did a little bit of some of the starting numbers. You notice how they're all around 1.6. It's not a rational number, so it doesn't have an even divisible. But you can see the numbers. I took the first few and divided them out. And whoops, I did in a stroke of pure genius. I managed to put a comma in there. It's not 1600, it's 1.619. But I thought that was fascinating, and it's fascinating that people do so much of what you do in your life is actually based on this. Kind of scary. Things that are interesting about it is flower petals. This ratio applies to flower petals. It applies to pine cones, which I thought was really interesting. I have a neighbor whose pine cone tree sheds in my yard all the time, so I went out and got one and checked it out. Human and non-human. Oh, this, by the way, the face ratio works very well with puppy dogs as well, and cats, and common pets around the house. If you have a snake, God help you. Anyway. They say that the golden section is manifested in the structure of the body, of the human body, and that's the face specifically. Seed heads, typically where seeds are produced, and those are the ones that are most common to you. The nice gentleman passed away, sometime around 1250. They're a little vague on what he passed. Apparently, they weren't terribly accurate about keeping days, but they kept years all right. So he died in 1250, and we're not sure what day. But when you're in a sale or something like that, or you're looking at your stock crashing because all the stockbrokers decided to sell on the same hour, you might look up Fibonacci and say something unkind about him when you're in church next. Have a nice day, folks. Thank you.